I grew up in what most people would call an ideal environment. My family was wealthy, really wealthy, but my parents were determined to make sure I didn't grow up spoiled. Sure, there was the big house, the vacations, and the private schools, but my parents always pushed me to earn my own way. I wasn't the kid who got a Ferrari for his 16th birthday, or the one who never had to work. My trust fund was real, but it was also out of reach until I turned 35. Until then, I was on my own. College was my first real taste of independence, even if I was still tethered by some family obligations. I went to an elite school, and it wasn't easy blending in with the crowd when everyone knew I was that guy, the one who was well off but trying desperately to seem normal. That's when I met Jenny. She was a breath of fresh air that I didn't even realize I needed. We met in an economics class, and unlike the other girls I'd met, she didn't seem impressed by money or status. She was smart, funny, and incredibly down to earth. I'll admit I was skeptical at first. After all, how many people can truly ignore wealth? But Jenny seemed different, or at least she made me believe she was. She drove an old beat-up car, lived in a modest apartment, and never asked for anything. We hit it off fast, and I fell for her in a way I hadn't expected. Jenny didn't care about fancy dinners, expensive gifts, or any of the things people usually associate with someone in my background. In my mind, I had found someone who loved me for me, not for my money or family name. After college, things moved quickly. We moved in together, found a cozy apartment in a quiet part of town, and life felt good. I had a decent job at a tech startup, and Jenny was working as a graphic designer. Money wasn't overflowing, but we were comfortable. Every time I offered to help her out, even with small things like splitting rent or paying for groceries, she would refuse. I don't want to be that girl, she'd say, and it felt genuine. I admired her independence, but cracks started to show early on, subtle at first, barely noticeable. Jenny would sometimes make offhand comments about how my life had been easier because of my background, how I didn't understand the struggles of someone who grew up without money. At first, I brushed it off. She wasn't wrong, after all, and I didn't want to make a big deal out of it. But the comments kept coming, and slowly I started to feel like I was being judged for something I couldn't control. We argued more frequently. Little things would set her off, like me working long hours. She'd accuse me of caring more about my job than our relationship. Other times, she'd get jealous if I spent time with friends, even though she was the one who encouraged me to have a life outside of her. I chalked it up to stress. After all, we were both navigating the complexities of early adulthood, and who didn't have growing pains? Then, out of nowhere, Jenny suggested we buy a house. It didn't make sense to me. Neither of us had the savings for a down payment, and we were doing just fine in our apartment. But Jenny was insistent. She started sending me links to properties way out of our budget. "We can make it work," she'd say. "You have a trust fund coming, and I'll start making more soon." That was the first time I felt genuinely uncomfortable. I had always admired Jenny's independence, and now it felt like she was waiting for the money to come in. I pushed back, explaining that I wasn't going to touch the trust fund. Not now and not for a long time. Jenny didn't take it well. She accused me of being selfish, of not thinking about our future. The conversation spiraled into a huge fight, and for the first time, I wondered if I had made a mistake. A few months passed, and things seemed to calm down. But something had shifted between us. Jenny became secretive, spending more time away from home and making vague excuses about work or seeing friends. I try not to think too much about it, but a part of me couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Then one night, Jenny left her phone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I wasn't the type to snoop, but curiosity got the better of me. As I scrolled through her messages, I found something that hit me like a ton of bricks. There were texts between her and an old college friend. Let's call him Mike. From the looks of it, they had been meeting up regularly, and it wasn't just friendly catch-ups. The texts were flirty, suggestive, and more than enough to tell me that something was going on behind my back. I confronted Jenny that same night. She didn't even try to deny it. Instead, she turned the tables on me, saying that I had been neglecting her, that I was too focused on work and my future to notice what was happening in our relationship. I was floored. Here she was clearly having an affair, and somehow it was my fault. We argued for hours, and by the end of it, I wasn't even sure what I believed anymore. Things went downhill fast after that. Jenny's behavior became erratic. One day, she would apologize, saying she wanted to work things out, and the next, she'd be distant, cold, and completely uninterested in fixing anything. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I tried to have a serious conversation with her, she would deflect, twist my words, and somehow make me feel like I was the one who had done something wrong. Then, out of nowhere, Jenny proposed. It was a strange moment. We had been on the rocks for months, and suddenly, she was asking me to marry her. She did it in the middle of a fight, no less. One second, we were arguing about her recent behavior, and the next, she pulled out a ring. This will fix everything, she said. We just need to commit to each other. I couldn't believe what was happening. Jenny, the girl who prided herself on being independent and not caring about status or money, was now suggesting marriage as a way to solve all our problems. It felt like manipulation, plain and simple. I refused, telling her we needed to work on our relationship before even considering something as serious as marriage. That night, Jenny packed a bag and left. She didn't say where she was going or when she'd be back. Days passed and I heard nothing. I wasn't sure what to think. Part of me was relieved, but another part of me was scared. Scared that maybe she was right, that I had somehow driven her away. A few weeks later, Jenny came back, and despite everything that had happened, we got married. I convinced myself that things would be different once we tied the knot, that marriage would stabilize everything. For a while, it seemed to work. Jenny apologized for her past behavior, and life felt almost normal again. But the calm didn't last long. Jenny started pulling away again, claiming work was overwhelming her. She became distant and irritable, and the business trips, those became more frequent. At first, I believed her, thinking it was just the nature of her job. But when I called her company during one of her trips, I found out from her boss, Peter, that she wasn't even in Chicago, like she had said. She had been working remotely. When she came home, I confronted her with everything. At first, she tried to lie, but when I pressed harder, she broke down and admitted the truth. But instead of apologizing, she lashed out at me, claiming she felt suffocated in the marriage. The entire confrontation was surreal. I couldn't believe how twisted everything had become. Things only got worse after that. She continued to distance herself, and eventually, she packed her bags again and left, saying she needed time to figure things out. I tried reaching out, but she avoided all contact. Then, a few months later, she dropped the bomb. She wanted a divorce. And to make matters worse, she wanted half of my property and a piece of my trust fund. That's when I knew I had to take action. I contacted a lawyer, and to my relief, I learned that Jenny wasn't entitled to any part of the trust fund. It was legally protected until I turned 35. Armed with that knowledge, I decided to let her think she had the upper hand. Then, something unexpected happened. Peter's wife, Anna, contacted me. She had found out about the affair and was just as furious as I was. Together, we came up with a plan to make sure neither Jenny nor Peter got what they wanted. Anna had connections at Peter's company, and she used them to quietly pull the rug out from under him, damaging his career. In the end, Jenny's plan to take half of my property and trust fund failed. She came to me, desperate and asking for help, but by then, I had moved on emotionally. I told her no, and that was the last time I ever saw her. Peter's career fell apart, and Jenny was left with nothing. As for me, I moved on with my life, finally free from the toxic relationship that had consumed me for so long.